Hi, my name is Suzanna Soto, and for my topic, I wanted to talk about something that happened very recently within Japanese history, and that is the assassination of Shinzo Abe and its repercussions. So, I chose this topic because it was a huge shock around the world, especially because gun violence and political violence is obviously not common in Japan, at least in the modern day. But it just goes to show that shocking events, anything can really happen anywhere, and it just takes one person to kind of mess everything up. Although the assassin, he did not really mess anything up for the most part. He seems to have accomplished his goal, which is something that is usually unheard of when it comes to like assassinations. Because usually political violence just leads to more violence, but in this case, it worked really well in the assassin's favor. So I'm shortly going to discuss the murder, but more importantly, the political and cultural ramifications of the assassination. So, just some background information. Um, Abe was indeed the longest serving prime minister of Japan, and he was shot just 2 days before a parliamentary election. So, that was on July 8th. Abe was delivering a campaign speech just outside of a train station on a small podium in Nara Prefecture when suddenly he was shot at close range. So as you can see, Abe was pretty much out in the open. There was not that many protective measures taken, but I suppose, in Japan, you wouldn't really have to worry about anything happening. But these vulnerabilities allowed for the suspect to shoot at Abe's back just a couple of feet behind him. And he was shot not once but twice. So once in the chest and once in the neck. And he did have bodyguards, but none of them were facing the opposite direction as Abe, which is where the shooter basically snuck up on them. So the assassination could have easily been avoided several ways. His bodyguards should have been able to notice the suspect moments before the shooting, and maybe if Abe had only been shot once, he could have survived. And he was at this intersection that was very exposed, like I said. To be honest, the setup is really weird because it's like he was speaking or campaigning in the middle of a road. So here's just another view. So Abe was like right here and he was facing this way. Um, the shooter came up around over here behind him. Um, so Abe was airlifted to a hospital about 43 minutes after he was shot and he bled out to death. Um, and he died 5 hours later. So the perpetrator, his name is Tetsuya Yamagami. He is a 42-year-old man whose motive for the shooting was Abe's ties to the Unification Church, or the UC for short, which is a cult that pressures its followers to donate large sums of money to the organization. Yamagami's mother had gone bankrupt after donating 100 million yen, or roughly $800,000, to the church, which ruined his family's life because he grew up in poverty. Um, he allegedly said he did say he was planning to kill the top of the religious organization, who is a Korean man, but it just seemed too difficult. So he decided that he wanted to kill Abe instead, as he thought that the former prime minister had affiliations with the organization, and it was just easier to get to Abe than the leader of this church. And Abe was actually campaigning just down the street from Yamagami's residence. So it was really easy to kind of access him. But he did say that he had no grudges against Abe's politics, which is very interesting because he is essentially claiming that this assassination was not really politically motivated. Yamagami just thought that Abe was the most accessible person to use to carry out his message. So the weapon, obviously, guns are not legal in Japan, so the weapon was a homemade pistol. The cannon was made of two metal pipes that was duct taped to a pistol grip and a wooden plank, in which batteries and a plastic trigger were also attached. Yamagami had learned how to make the weapon from online research and bought the parts and gunpowder online. Firearms specialists say that the weapon was relatively simple and easy to make, so anyone with some firearm knowledge could have made it. In 2002, Yamagami, he was part of the Maritime Self-Defense Forces for about 3 years, so it's believed that this is where he learned how to use, prepare, and manufacture guns. And at the time of the shooting, he was unemployed. So, as far as the aftermath, the assassination of Abe has sparked a big public debate about political ties to not only the Unification Church, but also religion in general, religious organizations. And while Abe himself, I believe he was technically not really a member, his ruling Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, had ties with the church, so they would mobilize followers to campaign during the election season. But I do want to point out that this is not completely out of the ordinary in Japanese politics. But Abe also does have familial ties to the organization, and he had kind of sponsored it on several occasions. So a little bit of history. The UC was founded in South Korea in 1954, and Abe's grandfather, who was also a former prime minister of Japan, he helped to establish the group in Tokyo in 1968. So this group actually has ties to politicians all over the world, usually with conservative leaders, likely because the group has very strong anti-communist rhetoric. So after World War II, Japanese leaders wanted to align themselves with powerful people so that the Japanese would like not embrace communism. And then, as more evidence of the LDP and then the Unification Church came to light due to Abe's assassination, public opinion of Abe and his party decreased a lot. For example, Abe's state funeral was incredibly controversial and sparked a lot of public backlash because so many people's opinion of him just got way worse, and because the event was over $1 million and it was taxpayer funded, which just added fuel to the fire. One poll from the Mainichi, which is like the everyday like newspaper, estimates that 62% of Japanese were opposed to the funeral. And one individual even set himself on fire in protest of it. So that's what these people are doing. They're protesting the state funded funeral. So the LDP quickly had to do some damage control since public opinion was not on their side at all. So in October of, I believe it was 2023, the cultural ministry asked the Tokyo District Court to issue an order to strip the group of its religious status. This meant that the church would no longer be exempt from corporate and property taxes. And also, about 70% of the church's funds come from Japan. So, anything going against the church, any law, would wipe out a lot of their revenue. The LDP also investigated its lawmakers and found that 179 of 379 lawmakers had interacted with the UC. And Japan's prime minister, after Abe's, or not after Abe's, but during the time of his death, which is Kishida, had gone so far as to try and sever ties between its lawmakers and the church. Only a month after the assassination, he even reorganized his cabinet and removed some members that were still affiliated with the organization, and one of the members that was removed was Abe's younger brother. At the end of 2022, they enacted a new law to restrict malicious donations by religious and even secular groups. Also, because of Abe's death, attention had been brought to cases of child neglect and abuse by parents who are active in these kind of religious cults. So this year, the Japanese government launched a nationwide survey, and they found that only 16% of the child guidance centers that responded to the survey had followed up on suspected cases of abuse, religious abuse between 2022 and 2023. So abuse includes parents that did not provide medical care for their children, parents that forced their beliefs and practices on their children, sometimes by physical violence or by threats, parents that malnourished their children because they donated so much money to organizations to the point where they could not afford enough food. So, this right here is actually from a pamphlet that was distributed to schools this year that they talk about different kinds of abuse and they talk about religious abuse. And indeed, like, according to relatives of Yamagami, his mother effectively stopped paying any attention to her children and devoted all of her time, money, real estate, and other assets, everything she owned, to the church. They talked about how sometimes they didn't have enough food, there was no father figure, and it caused Yamagami to not be able to get into a college because he couldn't afford it. Even though Yamagami was one of the smartest students at his high school, so he was more than qualified to get into a good college, which is essential to getting a good job in Japan even these days. So there are a lot of people that view Yamagami as kind of part of their lost generation, who is someone that is basically doomed for a life of poverty after not being able to find stable employment. And like I said, he was unemployed at the time of the shooting. But no matter his hardships, his actions can't be justified. He is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. He can face maybe the death penalty, but clearly he didn't think he had anything to live for anyways. And then as of today, Yamagami, he has been charged with murder, but he has not gone to trial yet. But no matter the outcome, he kind of got what he wanted. Not only did he successfully assassinate his target, he kicked off a kind of quote unquote revolution, and he single handedly discredited the ruling party of Japan. And they swiftly, very, very swiftly, forced them to seek a ban of the unification church in many aspects of their politics. I don't think Yamagami could have ever predicted this kind of public reaction. So that's why this situation all around is just very interesting. And even though the public, they did, of course, mourn their former prime minister, a lot of people sympathize with him, with the assassin. And it's just started a lot of important discussions all around. Where is it? This is my works cited. Thank you for listening.